can't breathe. That thing is hot, man.
You should try this outfit.
Yeah, I shouldn't be complaining.
No, you shouldn't.
Welcome to this week's Guitareo live lesson. You probably don't recognize this guy for one reason or another. If you've never seen him before, his name's Steve Brand. He's my local expert guitar repair tech guru. And you probably still don't recognize him because it's Halloween and he's got his little costume on. But
Happy Halloween, everybody.
yes. Today, man, I'm out of breath because I couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking all about guitar strings, and I figured who better to get in here than the person I know that probably knows the most about strings, I would imagine.
Kind of boring,
Mr.
really.
Steve Brand. So.
I should get out more, I know. Yeah.
So what we're going to do is just go through the types of acoustic guitar strings, electric guitar strings, talk about gauges, coded versus non-coded, when you should change your strings, and at the end of this lesson, we're going to do a little giveaway, so stick around and make sure we're going to be doing a little bit of trivia. Steve has a little bit of trivia, so we're going to be doing that on the YouTube chat.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll do it that way. To get into things, let's just start talking about materials for acoustic and then materials for electric.
Sure.
And if you want to give just a little brief spiel, and then we'll go into the two basic types of metal choices, right?
As far as acoustic strings are concerned, the general thing is you're going to hear the name bronze. And there's two main types. There's actual bronze, as it were, which a lot of people refer to as vintage bronze these days. It's an 80-20, so an 80%, 20% mix of copper and tin. And it's the original blend that was sort of originally developed for guitar strings. The only downside to it is it tends to oxidize quite quickly. A lot of people will find if they're quite acidic, they maybe get a week out of it.
Yeah, it's me.
Kind of thing, yeah. But, and as you mentioned briefly, the coated stuff, now that you can get a coated 80-20, it eliminates that. So you can now enjoy the tone of the 80-20, which is a more sort of mid-range, rich, more vintage sound, without that quick deterioration of tone. And then the more modern bronze is phosphor bronze, and it basically is the same blend, but it has some phosphor added into it, hence the name. And from that point of view, it's got a slightly broader tone spectrum, a little more bass, a little more top, and it tends to oxidize a little slower. So it tends to stay, like you pulled it out the pack for a little bit longer.
Is that the reason why they added the phosphor to it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it was to slow down the oxidation process.
I thought it was primarily for a tonal thing. But.
Well, it is when you think about it, because it stops it degrading. So you could get a great set of 80-20 strings, and by the time the weekend's out, they're not sounding the same kind of thing. You do 3 gigs, and they've changed drastically for a lot of people. So the big thing for phosphor bronze was the fact it didn't do that quite as quick. So you could do a weekend's worth of shows, or jamming with your buddies, or whatever you do, or recording, more importantly, and not get that drastic change in tone. Are you laughing at me?
I'm laughing at your costume.
Good. That's what it's for. Anyway, so from that point of view, the 80-20 is, like I say, a lot of people refer to it as vintage bronze. You'll actually see that on some string packs. I can't remember the names of the brands specifically that do it. So 80-20 bronze or vintage bronze. There are some subtle variants, like Guitareo, for example, do an 85-15, which
I didn't know that either.
Bell brass.
I have heard of that term before.
And I think it's actually called that because it's the same blend as what's in the Liberty Bell.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that's what they reference it.
Kyle, that first picture we have is phosphor bronze, and it has more of a red tint to it, kind of reddish copper.
Yeah, whereas the vintage bronze is very yellowy gold.
And that's the second picture there, Kyle.
Yeah.
And just like one big question, especially when I worked at a guitar store, people would like, what do I choose? There's 500 different acoustic strings.
Totally. Well, I mean, obviously the thing is you've got the material variations, then you've got all the gauges. Now, by gauges, what we typically mean, you talk to any guitar player and they say, oh, I play 12s, or I play 10s.
What does that mean?
And that's the thing. It's typically what we tend to reference is the gauge or the thickness of the high E string of the set. Now, again, the options that are available to us in string sets kind of blur the edges now. So when somebody says, oh, for electrics, I use 10s, well, do they mean 10 to 46 or 10 to 52? because there are hybrid sets that have become very, very popular with the different tunings that have become popular and that sort of thing. But to sort of hone in on that again, yeah, the most common acoustic string gauge is a 12, otherwise known as a light. And if you look at different makes of strings, some of those 12s will go 12 to 52, some will go 12 to 53, some will go 12 to 54. And it really is just finding out what suits you, and more importantly, what suits your guitar. Because different guitars, I mean, the stuff that we love about guitars, the wood that they're made of and all that different stuff, is also the stuff that drives us simply insane, because it's inconsistent. You can have two seemingly similar Martin D18s, for example, and they will have two very different characters. Not that one's better than the other, they're just different, because they weren't necessarily cut from the same tree. Simple as that. So one little experiment I've always suggested to my clients is if they have a guitar that's strung with lights and they're not sure whether that's the best for it, excuse me, tune it down a semitone. See if it gets better. If it gets better, then it would actually like a little less tension. Now, if it gets quieter, perhaps it would like
a little more.
Yeah. So tune it up to F. And if it gets louder, put heavier strings on it. I'm going to have to grab a water here. So anyway, the big issue with that, and this is where the whole gauge thing comes in, is the idea that the gauge affects the tension, and therefore affects the tone and the playability. So with a tighter string, some guitars sound louder and punchier and more defined, but they're obviously harder to play. So you get that trade-off.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's the general kind of format we're going to go for the rest, or for electric too, which we'll get into right now. Now, to me, you can correct me if I'm wrong or add to it. Like the two types of materials that I think about when I think about materials for. No, I was going to say you might be able to see your face a little bit better. There you go. Now you recognize Steve, right?
I'm cooking.
The two materials that I think about when I think about electric strings are nickel-plated steel and pure nickel.
Yes.
It's probably just because of my background and the kind of stuff that I play.
They're the most common. And probably nickel-plated steel is the most common. Again, old school was pure nickel. So a lot of string companies have reintroduced pure nickel wound strings. And the thing to stress is the cores actually don't change. It's not like the cores are nickel. The cores are still Swedish steel, typically.
Okay.
It's the wrap.
There you go. I was going to ask you, what is a core?
Yes. Yeah. So with a plain string, you just have that one single wire. That.
Like a high E, a high B, or G,
whatever.
Right?
Yeah. And whereas a wound string is that core with another one wrapped around it, quite simply. And the thing to remember, obviously, is that it's the core that gives it the tension. If you take that core away, the outside is a slinky. It doesn't do anything. It's purely providing mass and size from that point of view. And we'll go into a little more detail about that in a second. The big thing with the different materials is they do actually sound very different. So in an acoustic environment, like I said, the 80-20 bronze, the vintage bronze, has more of a warmth in the mid-range, whereas the phosphor has a bit more top and bottom. So often when you're talking to styles of player, the finger style is like the phosphor bronze, because it has that detail for individual notes. Whereas somebody who really wants to sort of, bang out a really cool, solid, chunky rhythm, they might prefer an 80-20.
That's if I'm doing fingerstyle stuff, I play phosphor bronze. If I'm playing like church strummy stuff or pop strummy stuff, I'd play 80-20.
Yeah, and it is just because it smooths it off, right? So we get the same variance with the electric strings. So with pure nickel, it's a warmer, softer tone, which obviously translates once you're cranking it through a very overdriven loud amp. It's a big, thick tone. It's not smooth by any sense of this. And then nickel-plated steel has a bit more brightness to it because the steel is brighter. The nickel plating on the outside is really more of a cosmetic thing, but also a tactile thing. Steel on its own can feel a little rough, whereas the nickel plating makes it feel nice and smooth. And that takes us to stainless steel, which is another option for guitar strings. And a lot of people like the tone of them, but don't like the feel. The stainless steel itself has almost kind of a...
They feel very dry to me.
kind of grainy,
Yeah.
almost like they have scales to them. So, you know, it not only wears your fingers out, but it can actually wear your frets out as well. Unless you set up the, you know, irresistible force and the immovable object by having stainless frets.
Steel on steel.
Yeah, not my thing. But anyway, the other thing then is we get into the gauges thing with the electrics. And again, you talk to people and they say, oh, I use 10s, oh, I use 9s, whatever. There's been a big craze, you know, in the last sort of decade or so. Basically, the sort of like the underlying sort of mantra has been, you need big strings to have good tone. And it's like, nah, that's not true. If you have big strings, you have big tone. What if you don't want big tone? What if you want detail or bright or whatever? So again, it's finding the right gauge of string to suit you, to suit the guitar, and to suit the style of music that you're playing. Obviously, a lot of guys now are tuning down, and as you tune down with a light gauge of strings, obviously they turn to rubber bands. So a lot of players are basically doing sort of a sort of pseudo baritone setup on their guitars, where they're tuning, you know, much lower than standard pitch, and therefore putting much heavier gauge strings on in order to offset that tension. You know, because you can imagine that, you know, if you're a 9s player and, you know, you're playing in standard pitch, you know, each string is pulling with the, you know, sort of 10 kilogram tension or whatever. If you're playing with 13s at standard pitch, it's double that.
Wow.
You know, so the guitar's got to be able to take it, which most can.
Yeah.
You know, but you can imagine something with a floating trem, you know, that trem's going to be pointing skyward before you know it. So from that point of view, it's horses for courses in that sense of choose the strings that work for you. There's tonal variance, and there's obviously tension variance. I personally am a complete and utter wimp, whether or not I'm wearing claws or not. 9s are great for me. That's the happy medium as far as I'm concerned. It's nice light tension. I don't have to fight it, and I like the tone. Simple as that. Billy Gibbons, for example, is currently playing with 7s.
Yeah.
You know, and when I had a store in England, I actually had a customer who wrote a sound used to make 6s and 7s.
I never even heard of 6s.
He ordered a set of each. You couldn't see the high E of the 6s.
Have to get glasses on?
It was like tiny. But he did like the 7s. He said the 6s were too light, but he liked the 7s.
Right.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, you look at a player like Tony Iommi.
Yep.
Because of the chopping these fingertips off,
Yep.
he's playing, what tuning are they in? Normally in C or something?
They're pretty low.
Yeah, and he's playing with basically a customized set of 8s that is lighter than a normal set of 8s. You know, and yet sounds great. And there are many other players that play with, you know, really quite light strings, but nobody ever criticizes their tone. So
no, Heaven and Hell, the live album, the DVD, I love the tone of that album. If you haven't checked it out, with Tony Iommi.
Yeah, because I think he's using like a 13 gauge G string.
Wow.
Which is
that's what some people use in
a
their high
B on a set of 10s. Yeah, so very, very light and getting massive tone out of it. The other thing, obviously, is the actual physical shape of the string. So we can get into stuff like flat wounds. You know, the normal sort of electric string you'll see will be described as round wound.
Right.
And what that means is the actual wrap, like I say, is like a duplicate of the core, just wrapped around it. Flat wound strings are basically a rectangular ribbon that is wrapped around, and they feel very slick, but they also, because of that sort of slab of material as opposed to it being a cylinder, it's a much smoother, much darker sound. So jazz guys like them a lot, as do some blues players. Some people just love the slick feel of them, and they'll just play whatever music on it, but they just love the feel.
I've never bought any, but I've picked up, every time I pick one up in the store, I love it. I think I just like the way it sounds. I like the mellowness.
Yeah. But you're not going to play...
I'm not going to play with metal on it, like we did earlier.
Not on a Halloween day, anyway.
Exactly. That's it. So what about, what's this coated, why do you want me to spend $25 on a pair of coated strings instead of a set of coated strings instead of $7 on a regular set of strings?
Yeah, okay. really the first company that hit the marketplace with the coated string that anybody really paid attention to was Elixir.
Right.
The interesting thing is actually Elixir are not actually a string maker. They actually buy their strings in bulk, I believe, from Guitareo.
I heard a lot of people do that.
And then apply their process to it, kind of thing. So, so they were the first ones, and I guess the people at Guitareo probably went, warranty null and void when they found out what they were doing to them. But obviously there was the idea of, well, yeah, let's look and see if there is a place in the market for a more expensive string that simply you do not have to change as often.
Yep.
The other boon with these, because basically what the coating is doing is preventing oxidation, which even if you're not playing the guitar, the strings are deteriorating over time. They're a boon for retailers because they can have a guitar hanging on the wall that maybe was in a warehouse for 6 months, is now hanging on their wall in their store for 6 months, and the strings still sound as fresh as when they took it out the box. Yep. So that actually is very much a plus thing from a sort of retail display kind of thing. Personally, and this is purely a personal comment, I feel the coated strings do lose a certain zinginess, a certain freshness, because it is a layer of something on the string. So it's almost like they're a couple of days old, but then they don't deteriorate beyond that. So it's a happy medium, a good compromise. The only thing I would say about some of the coated strings is that because they're not string makers and they're adding the coating as an aftermarket thing, as a sort of add-on process, it does affect the string sometimes in a negative way. So as much as it gives them long life, I have seen issues with sort of questionable intonation variances and that sort of thing, because it's an afterthought. And it's interesting, companies like Guitareo, obviously having seen what other companies were doing with their strings, thought, oh, well, I guess we better figure out a way to do this ourselves. So like with Guitareo's EXPs, for example, the coating is applied to the component parts of the string before it's wound.
Before it's made, yeah.
So now the coating is an integral part of the string, not something that's an afterthought.
Aftermarket, yeah.
So they feel very similar to an uncoated string.
They do, yeah.
And they last, again, 3, 4, 5 times as long, but they're much more consistent, more like an uncoated string in that sense. Then the one little thing that we should really talk about is the hidden stuff with strings. Now, one of the reasons why round wound string as opposed to a flat wound string will deteriorate is that when you're looking at like a cross section of a wound string, you have that core and you have a cylindrical core, wrap around it. So there are tiny, tiny little gaps in between all these circular shapes. Then nothing actually fits perfectly together.
Could we get number 6 up there? There you go.
Okay, and there are actually different shapes of cores. So the traditional is just literally a round core, a cylindrical core that then has a cylindrical wire wrapped around it. So that gives you 360-degree contact with the core, but there's still the little gaps between the individual windings, like so. The argument against that is that obviously dirt and sweat and oil can get in there. It can corrode from the inside out, kind of thing. Now with the hex core, the reason why they developed the hex core is sometimes with a round core rather, the winding can come loose. The hex core gives it 6 little corners to bite into as they're making the string, but it does create yet another air gap in there, kind of thing. So the detractors would say, well, it's just more space that dirt and grime can penetrate into and that sort of thing. The other thing beyond that is that the hex core changes the tension. Because even though it might still measure, let's say for argument's sake, 20,000th of an inch, corner to corner, it's lost 6 little sides.
Yeah.
It's got less mass in it. So if you have a 40 gauge string that has a round core and a 40 gauge string that has a hex core, that hex core will feel slightly lighter.
Slinkier, yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that then happens, which is another hidden thing, is that different manufacturers will change the ratio, and that's going to be the next diagram.
The next, number 7, Tom?
Between the core and the wrap. So let's say, again, we have a 40 gauge wound string. You could have a 20 gauge core with a 10 gauge wrap, which would obviously add 10 each side, makes 40.
Right.
But what if you had an 18 gauge core with an 11 gauge wrap? That still equals 40. But obviously the 18 gauge core has less mass, less tension than the 20.
Right.
So you could buy your regular set of strings, but buy a different maker, and suddenly your guitar's setup is completely messed.
Feels different, sounds
Because
different.
there's more tension or less tension. And particularly, with a guitar like this with a floating trem, you change that core diameter, because it's the core that has the tension, not the winding, and the setup's completely changed, usually for the worst. So from that point of view, there are many, many little hidden things. And so it's one of those things like when I'm quoting somebody for, the price of a restring, it's very much, the fine print is like for like. So if you had 10 gauge Diodareos on it and you want me to put 10 gauge Diodareos back on it,
easy.
It's easy. If we're changing and I happen to know that particular brand that you want to try has different specs to it, there's going to be extra fees involved in terms of the tension changes. Yeah, so there we go.
Cool. No, that's, I didn't know that about the hex thing. I didn't know. I thought it was just for, again, purely tonal reasons or something.
Again, because it creates a lighter core, it does brighten them up. The round core has a sort of, again, warmer kind of tubbier sound, whereas the hex core is a little bright, more detailed. So it's kind of, it compounds that difference between like vintage bronze and phosphor bronze, because often the vintage bronze have round cores, and then the phosphors have hex.
Okay.
But if you look at a company, say like DR, they have all different options. So you can have a vintage bronze with a hex core, or you can have a phosphor bronze with a round core, and get those blends of characters and blends of tensions.
Cool.
Yeah.
One thing I forgot to mention at the very beginning, guys, if you want to download the jam track we were playing to, it's called 13 and South. It's just in the style of Pantera. The tab and the MP3 are there for you below the video on guitarlessons.com/live, the page for this lesson. What else was I going to say? Had one more piece of really important information before I get to it, but that's okay, because I can't remember it. The last kind of area that's what it was. If you have questions, members, get them in right now. If you're in the members area, just click question below and submit it. There are already a lot in there, so we're going to get to them fairly quickly, because I know it's going to take a long time for us to get through them. The last thing that I want to go over with you, Steve, is I want you to tell somebody how they know when they should change their strings.
Okay. Again, this is somewhat of a personal thing. But basically, if you listen to the sound of fresh strings, there are certain details of frequencies that you can hear and that sort of thing, certain nuances of your playing that actually come out that start to fade away as a string starts to get dirty or tired or whatever you want to describe it as. So from that point of view, most players suddenly just sort of kind of get the feeling that the guitar doesn't sound right. That something's missing. Usually what that something is treble. Old strings start to sound muffled, like you're playing through a sock. But saying that, again, some people like that tone. So from that point of view, you can say, your strings probably need changing, but if it's purely a tonal shift that has happened and they like it, well, that's fine. The other issue that you will see as strings get really old is things like tuning stability and intonation start suffering. And obviously, once you get to the point where you can't keep the guitar in tune, it's time to change your strings. It's very simple. Now, is there a golden rule as to when that happens? Absolutely not. It depends on your body chemistry as to how acidic, how salty you are. It depends on the time of year, the climate, so where you live. If you're somewhere that's humid and, you're on the seashore with salt air all the time, your strings aren't going to last as long. If you live in a dry desert climate and you're not sweaty, your strings may well last months without any deterioration whatsoever. Yeah. So it really is a thing where you've got to figure it out. It's a tough one for new players because it really is like there is no hard and fast rule. I've known some people who just, as out of habit, just said, okay, I'm just going to put new strings on every month.
That's a good rule of thumb for me.
The other thing which people don't realize is that our fingers, when we're playing, keep the front of the string clean. It's the underneath of the string that gets all the dirt and the corrosion, and that's what wears your frets out.
Oh.
So if you want to play on little rusty little files that are chewing up your fingerboard and your frets, leave them on as long as you like. But realistically, yeah, I'm ridiculously fussy about the tone of my strings. 45 minutes. Yeah.
My body chemistry is terrible.
Yeah.
So like after one practice session, it's like, well, that was fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to take like 3 guitars to a gig and change all the strings afterwards.
Oh man, that's a lot of
Money.
and a lot of time. Cool. Well, there are lots of questions, loads of questions.
Okay, start hitting me with some of them then.
Let's get to them. This is from Batarack. And don't forget, we're doing giveaways after this on YouTube, so if you're there, stay there. It says, what effect does changing the string size have on guitar setup? Can the size of the strings affect the curvature of the neck, action, or saddles? And does the string size affect the playability and tone? How far is too far when going up or down the string size?
Well, I think we've already answered every bit of that in our sort of breakdown, but yeah, absolutely. So changing the gauge changes the tension. If the string tension changes, then obviously that force on the guitar changes. So if you're going lighter, then things like truss rod adjustment and tremolo balance and that sort of thing all change. So neck relief changes, consequently action changes. A lot of things change. The other thing that people don't realize is that not all strings automatically fit on all guitars. A lot of guitars, like your typical Les Paul, for example, is the nut slot is cut for 10s. And then, like I say, there are different 10s. So they're cut for 10 to 46. So if you go and buy a set of 10 to 52s, your wound strings are not going to fit in those slots. Simple as that. You need to get the guitar set up to take those sets, not just in terms of tension and everything, but just the physical size of them.
You did that to that guitar, the one I was playing in this lesson. You did.
Well, there you go.
Because I put 10s on it from 9s.
Well, that's right. I remember. So many guitars.
Yeah. Next question, it's a two-parter. John Murphy, hey man, says, Nate, congratulations. Thank you very much. He said, and Steve, I have a Martin D28 with medium strings, I think similar to what it came with, question mark. Now, Martin offers several varieties in multiple gauges, wound, would the retro strings be appropriate for folk country music? What weight, light, medium, heavy, and what gauge for each string, EAD, GBE? I am a senior citizen with some arthritis, rheumatism, so I am unsure as to what weight gauge to use. Yep, good.
Well, here's the thing. So one of the things that has become very, very popular are a lot of the hybrid sets. So for somebody like him who is starting to have some issues with his hands and that kind of thing, taking some tension off, but perhaps not all of it. So you still get the guitar to work and sort of have a similar to sort of factory gauge string. Most Martins, by the way, if you look inside them, stamped in the inside is medium gauge or lighter.
Right.
Yeah, they don't want anything heavier than that. So there are things called bluegrass sets, which are actually a hybrid set between light and medium. So it's the treble strings of a light blended with the bass strings of a medium.
Those low notes,
so it gives you that sort of chording solidity, as it were. The tension's there for chording, but for little melody lines, that sort of stuff, or the more sort of delicate fingerstyle things, it's a little bit lighter on the treble side. So that way, for somebody who's starting to have a little bit of issues with their hands, where maybe tension is a bit of an issue, it's worth trying that perhaps. And if that sort of half fixes the problem, then go to just a light or a custom light. A custom light is typically, like say, light is 12 to 53. Custom light is 11 to 52. So it just takes like a 1,000th of an inch off of each string, but it actually makes quite a difference in terms of how they feel. So it is an experimentation thing. And again, like I say, very important to find out what suits you. Yeah, it really is.
Cool. John, he had a follow-up question. He says, hey, Nate and Steve, it's me again. For years, I've only heard about hammering on or off, hammer-ons and off, not pull-offs. Okay? Is there such a technique as an H-off, hammer-off? I don't think so.
No, it's a pull-off.
Yeah,
it's just the opposite of Do you want to demonstrate there?
Well, I'm gonna do it on acoustic because it's playing acoustic. And he said, let me finish this. Also, when H on, do you when you hammer on? Also, do you do so with a finger that's not already holding down a string whilst releasing? Yes and no. You can. You can do a hammer on, pull off.
Yeah.
On an open string, like this, right?
Yep.
But hammer on, pull off.
Yep. And you can actually, a technique that Satriani coined the term hammer-ons out of nowhere, which is the idea of just starting with a hammer-on. Yeah, that's you.
Yeah.
You know.
Cool.
So, yeah, it's either or.
Cool. Next question. This is from, oh goodness, this username. What for of Eagle Pass? Okay. How's it going? Hi Nate, I'm new to Guitareo. What time zone are you using when listing the live lessons? We are Pacific time, so
Specifically.
west coast of the U.S. We're in Canada though. We're in Vancouver. What is GMT? Something Mountain Time. I forget.
GMT?
GMT.
Greenwich Mean Time. That's
okay.
that's the 0 point
That's the
in
0.
London.
Yeah. It should, if you're having trouble with it, it should adjust automatically to whatever time zone you're in according to your browser. Yeah. So maybe you just reboot your computer if you haven't done that already.
So am I right that Pacific is 8 hours? So minus 8 hours from GMT, is
Don't
that
get
right?
me lying.
Okay.
I don't know.
Cool.
He says, are the live streams again at a later time or date? Thanks, Phil. Oh, that's a lot easier. Hey Phil. Yes, they're archived usually a couple, 3-4 days after they broadcast. You can go in the members area, and at the bottom of the live page, you'll see miss a live lesson or something like that. You can click on that, and they're all archived in there for you to watch. Cool. Get your questions in, guys. We still have at least 8 questions left.
Keep going.
Joe Snow says, hey, I need to change the saddle on my acoustic guitar, Martin 00 or 00-15M. I use light strings and play mostly fingerstyle. Any suggestions on what to get? I see there are several types of materials. Thanks for your help.
Okay, the fact that you have your acoustic still in your hands, Martins do 2 different styles of saddle. Okay. One is like this, where it is in a defined slot with an end, as it were. That is very simple to replace. Okay. The other ones they do are actually fitted in, and they actually come to the end where the slope of the shoulder of the bridge is. They are not so easy to replace because they are actually part of the bridge. I mean, it's still a bone or synthetic saddle material.
You want me to look up that model number he mentioned?
Yeah, just in case, see if there's a quick
and you can go ahead and
Google
continue
image search. As far as materials are concerned, again, there's a certain amount of personal preference, but a lot of the synthetics, it would be doing them a huge disservice to refer to them as plastic. They are, okay, so that's like yours, that's fine. Cool. So from that point of view, I would highly recommend the Graphtec products like Tusk.
I really like those too.
What's really interesting is if you've got a nice marble countertop or something at home, take a bone saddle and a Tusk saddle and drop them. The bone one that everybody raves about goes cluck, and it doesn't ring or anything, and the Tusk one goes chime.
You can hold a tuner up to that,
like a xylophone, and it's like, why do I want that dead thing, which literally is a dead thing, or the synthetic one that nothing living had to be chopped up to provide, and it sounds better, and they're better for under saddle transducers as well.
Okay, that's
because bone. This again, the times they are changing. Originally bone was often, ivory or whalebone or whatever, and was actually incredibly consistent. That was why it was so popular. Now, most bone saddles that you find in instruments are beef bone, and it has all sorts of inconsistencies and soft spots and that sort of thing. I mean, sure, it's still strong enough to hold up a cow, but it's, in terms of our sonic needs, there's variances in it. So the synthetics are way better.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. News to me. Okay, next question, Marion. Hey, how's it going? Is it okay to put different string gauges on my acoustic guitar? For example, extra lights 10s on the high E, B, and G strings, and then custom lights 11s on the D, A, and E strings. I'm trying to persuade my fingers to accept higher gauge strings because I like the fuller sound, but having 11s on the high E, B, and G strings is making chords harder for me to handle, especially the F. Yeah, the dreaded F.
Again, absolutely. This is kind of like the first answer about the hybrid sets. There's nothing in the rule book that says you're not allowed to make your own hybrid sets. Many guitar stores, will sell you individual strings. So you can look at all the packs, like lay all the packs out on the counter and go, okay, I want the E from that, and the B from that, and the G from that, and they should be able to supply you the individual strings to make up the sets you want.
Yeah.
It's a slightly more expensive way to buy your strings, but other than that, it may provide the answer that you're looking for in terms of playing, your guitar comfortably.
There's a lot of like professional gigging musicians. They're like, oh, I only do custom set of strings. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty common for those guys.
Absolutely. Well, and a lot of companies now, because that is such a prevalent thing these days, there are a lot of string companies out there that as long as you order, let's say, a box, like a dozen sets, they will do you your custom gauges.
That's pretty awesome.
Again, DR, I know will do this. As long as you order a box, so 12 sets, you can make up whatever gauge you want with all the different core specifications, the wire, all that sort of stuff. That's all they ask you in terms of commitment is you must buy a box. They want to do one set.
And for most people, that's like a year's supply.
Precisely. And the modern packaging for strings keeps them fresh anyway.
Yeah, that's something that's gotten a lot better over the past decade or so. Yeah. Cool. Next question, Rob Parr says, it is a question of dexterity or technique or practice. Is what? Let's see. Or age. I am a youthful 61. I'm just starting out, completely hooked and enjoying your sides, but darn if you can manipulate your fingers to stretch more than 2 frets, first finger to third, or ring finger, etc. We're doing a practice along session day after tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We're going to be going over some exercises and tips for developing dexterity, but a lot of it, even at your age, 61 really isn't that old anymore. My dad is 65 and he still plays banjo, guitar, mandolin, bass, all these things. But a lot of it is just being very consistent with your practice over time. And maybe even practicing multiple times a day if you can, and just getting, whether we like it or not, the older we get, the slower things come to us.
Well, because obviously when you're 14, you're an information sponge.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're all excited and you just do it. And you've got time. You haven't got a job and that sort of nonsense. The other thing for the dexterity, and I think one thing you were saying about just spreading his fingers, develop a little exercise for yourself. Be it just a little piece of a pentatonic scale or something. Play it up high, like around the 12th fret, and then each day play it for 5 or 10 minutes, but like you say, 2 or 3 times a day. And then the next day, move it down a fret and do that same routine again, down another fret. And eventually you're down here at fret 1 and you've eased your way into it. It doesn't seem like such a problem anymore.
Yeah, it's being consistent with it is really probably the biggest thing.
And also for that sort of practice thing, I've always told people it's much better rather than cramming and potentially hurting yourself, little and often. Just a few minutes here and there. If you can get 4 5-minute sessions in working on one particular thing in a day, you'll do far more progress than not playing for a week and then playing for an hour.
Right. And forcing your body and your mind to recall that many times a day is going to be much better for you. Cretaceous. I think I said that right for once. He says, to prolong the life of my strings, I always clean them with fast fret after playing. Do you recommend that, or is there a better way? In fact, those sticks dry out very quick. Unfortunately, I cannot attend a live lesson, but he will watch the recording.
Okay. I've used fast fret for years.
I use it.
It does work.
Yeah.
Guitareo Planet Waves do a product called Accelerate, so EXLR8, I think is what they call it. Same idea, little impregnated thing that you wipe on the strings. The biggest thing with that is, like I say, the front of the strings is not important. It's the back of the strings. So that with a product like fast fret, where they give you that little cloth, once you put the fast fret on the string, put the cloth, looped around the string and zip up and down the back of the string. That will do the biggest benefit.
Okay.
Kind of thing, because it's if you leave the dirt on the back, it just corrodes regardless of how clean the front is.
Why are my strings breaking?
Yeah, precisely. So from that point of view, the fast fret idea, that sort of stuff is good. They are good products. It's just a good thing to be in the habit of using it like before and after you play, that kind of thing.
Cool.
So,
what about it's not going to do anything to your fretboard or the fret slots?
The only things that I've seen that people really have to be careful of with that kind of stuff is the idea of lemon oil. A lot of people will sort of arbitrarily slap lemon oil on their guitars. It's a relatively good idea to do it if you have an open grain fingerboard. So not lacquered maple, in other words, rosewood, ebony, that sort of thing, where we're actually touching the wood. And the lemon oil will protect that wood and sort of rejuvenate it. You know, kind of like putting linseed oil on a baseball bat, kind of idea. The problem with it is if you just buy cheap lemon oil from, you know, whatever big box store, a lot of the cheaper lemon oils have quite a high percentage of petroleum distillates in them.
That's bad.
And that will melt plastic. And we have lots of plastic on our guitars, be it, you know, inlays, binding, whatever. Obviously not all guitars, but a lot of guitars do. So you might put that on and suddenly see all your fret markers get a bit curly, kind of thing. You know, it's like, it's not very nice. So if you want to do that, just go to a good guitar store or go to a proper furniture repairer. They will have good lemon.
Something without petroleum in it?
Without it, yes, or very minimal amounts in it.
Piajitsu, hey, how's it going? He says, I play acoustic and I prefer a warmer sound. What strings are the warmest in your opinion?
Again, yeah, so as we said earlier, the idea of the vintage, the 80-20 bronze, and particularly if you can find some with a round core. So if you look at the Martin SPs, they are round cores. I can't remember which ones the DRs, I think it's the high beams are round cores. You can double check, it says on their packaging. So round core, vintage bronze, and a slightly heavier gauge. So, you know, you want mediums. That's basically the recipe right there.
Okay, cool. Perfect. We got 3 questions left as of right now.
Okay.
Let's see. Kenneth, how's it going, man? Says, thanks for this. I can only watch on iPhone for now. I change my strings every 10 days or so. I think this is a quick, but they are losing something, so I change them. I only play acoustic since I'm out in the desert. I use moisturizer on strings and the guitar. I do like the coated strings, and they last me just a bit longer. It might be the desert because they do not have a bright sound.
It could literally be, depending on, you know, again, his playing technique, that sort of thing. It could just be he's wearing the coating off.
Yep.
You know, if he is literally in the desert, it's going to be a fairly harsh environment. So they probably are helping, just not as much as they would help for somebody who's just sitting in their living room in nice, cozy Vancouver.
Right.
Simple as that. Yeah.
Cool. Let's see, 2 more. This is from S Wrestler. I got the odd burr on my calluses, which catches on the string at times. It's somewhat annoying and disruptive. What will coated strings eliminate this?
If I'm understanding that correctly, he's saying he's actually got rough skin that is catching the strings. Right. The strings won't really change much of that. The elixirs, because their coating is on the string after the string is made, have a slightly slicker feel than anything. So people who like elixirs, I understand why. But I don't think it would stop that. You are literally going to have to very carefully get some fine grade sandpaper and literally sand those callus edges off. Yeah, simple as that.
Cool. Easy solution.
Yep.
One last one.
Do I get a prize?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't know what you want, but we'll talk about it later.
I don't.
Mayberry 2017 says, Steve, what is your opinion about Martin titanium wound strings? Are they worth the high price?
A lot of these fads, I feel, are a little bit faddish, as it were, if that is such a word.
Sure.
But you know what? Again, it's personal preference. If they intrigue you, try them. If they don't impress you, don't spend your money on them. Simple as that. But if you happen to find that you put them on and angels sing, then stick with them. It really is. I'm one of those people, I don't believe everybody should use the same thing I do.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one thing I've been thinking this whole time, is don't let somebody tell you what type of strings or what gauge you should be using.
Yeah.
Just experiment for yourself. And
Even though we just did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for us.
Yeah.
No, but it reminds me, like I was trying to do a classical piece on this guitar. And I was like, it's just too jangly. I love the sound of steel strings, but I ended up buying some silken steels.
You know how I mimicked a classical once? Tens.
10s, just
10 gauge electric strings.
I ended up just renting a classical guitar.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, 10 gauge electric strings, lots of compression and lots of reverb, and it will fool the ear. But it's, just get a classical.
Yeah, that's what I ended up doing. I ended up renting one from Long McQuaid up here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that it?
That's it for the questions. Let me do one
Right
last
on.
double check, but we're about to give away some strings here. I don't know what kind of strings you play, so I bought some 3-packs of strings, and if we don't have what you like, I'll just go exchange them if you end up winning for whatever you want. So you can have acoustic or electric, and then just let us know what string gauge you want to.
So here's the gist of the question.
Okay.
As we said, it was a very big trend not that long ago to, basically have tow truck cables for strings, and that was the manly thing to do, quote unquote. I'd like to know. There are 3 very famous electric guitar players who immediately spring to mind when I think about very light gauge strings. We talked about Billy Gibbons, so I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about 3 different ones.
3 others.
So anybody who can get one of those 3 who is very, very well known for having used very light strings throughout their entire career, they will be one of the winners.
Okay.
It's a bit of a vague question, because some people might consider 9s to be very light strings, but we're talking lighter than 9s.
Lighter than 9s. And if you're not on Facebook, go on Facebook and write your answer down in there. And the first 3 people that answer correctly
hit one of those 3, yes, that I'm thinking of. How vague is that?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if 3 people guess all the same one, that's fine. So it may take a while to get this in here. But what strings do you use on your guitars, like specifically?
Guitareo EXL 120s, so 9 to 42 nickel wound, or nickel plated wound, I should say. Those.
These?
Yeah, that's what's on here right now.
That?
Is that my prize?
I don't know. That's your prize. This is what I use. I use the same thing, only 10s.
Yeah, absolutely. So from that point of view, I also really like the new NYXLs.
So do I.
Yeah.
They're a little expensive for my taste.
And again, this is just another thing where there are different materials coming into the string market. So, find out what works for you.
All right, guys, come on. Guess, who do you think Steve is thinking about of the 3 players that are famous or their whole careers are spent playing really light gauge strings?
And I guess the hint there with their whole careers is these are not new players.
No, they're not new players.
Guys have been around for decades. Let's put it that way.
Well, we already said Billy Gibbons. We talked about him in the lesson, so that doesn't
there's
count.
3 more.
There's 3 more. What else was I going to ask you? I was going to ask you something else. Oh, I was going to about the silk and steel. If you are, if you're wanting a little bit warmer tone on the bottom, right? Softer tone. That's a better word. Those are actually strings that you put on a steel string guitar with ball ends.
Yep.
But the core of them are nylon, just
Filaments.
like on a classical guitar, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely.
He says Lindsey Buckingham.
Not one of the ones I'm thinking.
Not one of the ones. No. He said 7s bend easier. Jerry Cates says 7s bend easier. Yeah. Less tension.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's see.
the offset is obviously that you have to learn to control that.
Right.
Because they literally bend so easily. So Billy Gibbons, if I understand the story correctly, he first got into it, I think it was when they were recording their Rhythmine album, and he took like a standard set of 9s and tuned it down to A. So it was absolutely just flopping off it, and it took him hours to just get the feel for it. But once he did, he thought it was like the most delicious tone going, so hence he started experimenting with very low tension string sets.
I could call her my wife now. Chelsea uses a standard set of strings for acoustic, but she downtunes to drop C on some stuff.
Right.
And her guitar is set up to take that, so it works really well.
Absolutely.
Cool. Come on, guys. If nobody wins, we're going to come up with something a little bit easier as far as...
I'm just going to say Google is your friend.
Google is your friend. Stevie Ray Vaughan, opposite day.
There's a little bit of mythology there, though.
Oh, is there? Okay,
yes, because a lot of times people go, oh, man, yeah, that's why you got to have big strings, because like Stevie Ray used 13s.
Oh, I thought he
No, he
12s.
didn't.
Mm-hmm.
He used, if I remember this correctly, 10 to 52s, and used to break the 10s a lot, and eventually ran out of them.
Ah.
So he put a B string on in its place. So he had a 13 gauge high E.
Ah,
so
not the whole set was.
So it was like 13, 13, 17, something like that. And so, again, it was a hybrid set. So he loved that extra tension that 13 gave him on the high E. But the rest of it was still a fairly normal set of strings. So it was a hybrid set.
Okay, I got another guess here for you. Jimmy Page.
No.
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. Let's see.
But they're in the right era.
Oh, okay. So it's more of a classic rock.
Yeah, long time players.
All right. If you're just tuning in, we're just fishing for an answer for winner for a pack of strings, a 3-pack of strings of your choosing, and restate the question for me.
One of 3 players that immediately leaped to my mind, who are well-established players, been around for decades, who are known for using string gauges lighter than 9 gauge.
So 8s or 7s or something.
Yeah,
like that.
but
Okay.
Billy Gibbons is not one of the answers because we discussed him too much.
Jerry Cates asks, "Is it Joe Walsh?"
Don't believe so.
So what about B.B. King?
Nope, 10 to 52.
10-15. Okay, cool.
It's sad I know these things.
I know, it's awesome. While we're waiting on some more guesses, get your guesses in, guys, if you want to win some strings. And you don't, it can be anywhere, we'll ship it to you. Doesn't matter. Tom Svet. He says B.B. King. Nope.
Nope.
Let's see. Muddy Waters. Eddie Van Halen.
Yes,
Bam.
that
Woody
is one
Phillips.
of them. When
What-
he played the Les Paul Custom, he used 8s.
Cool. Woody Phillips, email me, support@guitareo.com, and we'll get you your address. You can send us your mailing address and all that stuff, and we'll get those mailed out to you. Make sure to include if you want acoustic or electric, and what gauge, too. So, did I say Muddy Waters yet? That's another guess.
Yep, he, I think, played 9s.
Oh, okay. Right on. I would figure you played heavier than that. I don't know why.
Yeah. A few of the classic blues guys do actually play quite light strings. Is it Clarence Gatenath Brown? He's another 9 player. Yeah, there's quite a few.
All right.
Again, it's a bit of a misconception that you have to have these tow rope strings if you're going to play the blues.
I know Andrew plays 12s on his, or he did play 12s on his electric.
Yeah.
Up until recently. I think he moved on to 11s or something like that.
Don't get me wrong, I know lots of guys who do use heavy strings and play amazing stuff on
The one thing that attracts me about heavier gauge strings is the tension for picking. I like if I could have my acoustic down here and electric for this hand, I would do that 100% all the time. Cool. Well, guys, I'm giving you one more minute, and then we're going to call it a day. I'm going to check for questions again. Thanks, Steve, for coming out.
Hey, my pleasure.
And like I said, Steve is local here, so if you guys have anything in the forums that you want, you members, that you like, I really want to know about this as far as guitar setup, repair, anything like that, just let us know, and we'll schedule Steve to come out again.
Well, and they are more than welcome to contact me through Facebook.
Awesome, cool.
Facebook.com/Steve Brand Music Services.
Cool. Van Halen. Well, let's give S. Wrestler said Van Halen, but it was through a different source. Okay. So I'm giving it to him.
Cool. So
just
one more.
Email support@guitareo.com with your mailing address and electric or acoustic and what string gauge you want. Let's see. Oh, he has a question too, though.
Oh, go on.
Oh, no, this is from earlier. That's from earlier. Sorry about that, guys. Come on. All you have to do is type that same... Oh, Mick Mars from Motley Crue. You know what? That's a really good guess because he's pretty feeble, isn't he?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, he's got some really difficult health issues with his spine.
Right.
That's good. He's not one that I'm thinking of, but that's an interesting guess because of his health issues.
Right. In 30 seconds, I'm giving it to you, Jerry. 1, 2, 3. I won't count. But yeah, we'll go Jeff Loomis. I don't think so. Nope. Jeff Loomis is pretty standard. I thought he was like 9.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's do it. Where was that?
And I'll look up the Mick Mars one.
Yeah, go ahead and email me for that last one. For Mickey Mars, yeah.
Yeah.
And
so the ones I was thinking of, just so you know, it's Trevor Rabin from Yes.
Okay.
And that guy from Queen.
Brian something.
Yeah, that guy.
What did he use?
He's quite well known.
Yeah.
8s forever. Yeah, so Van Halen, Trevor Rabin from Yes, Owner of a Lightning Heart, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, other than that, the only one that really comes to mind for me is Billy Gibbons.
Yeah. Just because it's been such a publicly discussed thing recently.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, but a lot of guys have just silently been using wimpy strings and not telling anybody. There you go.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming out. I hope you learned a lot about strings. And if you have any questions for us, you can always email us or check out Guitareo.com.
Yeah, the questions can go beyond this. As far as I'm
that's for you. And you can look. What's your Facebook?
Like I say, Facebook.com, Steve Brand Music Services.
There you go. Cool. We'll see you guys later.
Great. Thank you.